The documentary is pinned at the top of the chat. It's free on YouTube right now, so you have access to it. I'm sure they wouldn't mind you clicking away and watching it now if you really wanted to.
Yeah, really.
We'll also, put it in your watch later joint. And then I'll definitely make community posts about it later today. So just want to put that out there.
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, this is a very tragic and very true story of two men who were incarcerated, and currently still are incarcerated. They were incarcerated back in 1985, and they were both relatively close to being released to come home to their families, to their loved ones, back in 1985. And so while they were there, they had formed a group called the Black Dragons, which was just a group of brothers who were encouraging each other to be politically minded and to stop going for the okie doke of committing petty crimes to get your life deprived. They were a group joining together to look at the bigger picture, and to watch out for each other and to educate each other. So then during that process, while they were incarcerated, there was also another group, a group of officers, and not only officers, but prison administrators and officials. And this group was called the Sons of Light. All this is documented. None of this is speculation. All these are true, proven facts. So these officers, these white supremacists, called the Sons of Light, they would operate their villainy and their tyranny against inmates of color on a regular and consistent basis. And extreme brutality, extreme violence. And in particular, this case, there was an individual named Lincoln Love. Lincoln Love was incarcerated at that time, and he took a big part in educating those brothers and passing them books and encouraging and trying to deter people from a life of crime to a life of integrity and doing things for your community and doing things for your family and being there, a staple of your community and your family, the way a man should. So they were encouraging. And now the white supremacist guards, they didn't like this type of rhetoric, and they didn't like this particular individual because he had the audacity to acknowledge himself as a man who deserves respect. Since he would not bow down to them, they took it upon themselves one day, as the documentary clearly lays out, to go into his cell and cuff him up. He submitted. He allowed them to put the cuffs on him without a fight and anything like that. But once the cuffs were properly placed and sealed on him, they went to beating this brother, man. They went to beating him in a brutal, very violent way. It goes into a lot of extreme detail on this documentary, and we getting firsthand commentary, people who actually saw these events, people who were actually there, people who actually reacted to these events.
Who just to interrupt briefly, like one of the big R was literally the cell across the way from this beating, so he was able to watch it straight from his cell, and they were in the maximum restraint unit and beating him with billy clubs. I think he even said one of the guards jumped up on the bed and started hitting him. Yeah, exactly. And he's handcuffed behind his back the whole time while this happened. But you can continue.
Once they heard about this attack, and they had already known about the type of things that the Sons of Light would do in the penitentiary to men of color, and once they had heard this, they used their position. See, these wasn't guys on lockdown. These were guys who had a special privilege in the prison because of their position. They were lay advocates, which means they worked directly with the administration as a liaison between the administration and offenders when they have to go in front of the conduct board. If they get written up for some what would be determined as negative conduct, it would be John Cole, Christopher Trotter, who actually went in to defend those brothers, and to talk to administration. So they had a good relationship with the prison administration. So they tried to use their positions to go to the authorities the proper authorities and say, hey, this is going on. Don't let these men kill this innocent man in a prison cell. They came with a plea. They came asking for assistance for the authorities of the prison. And once immediately they were supposed to be dismissed and just pushed away and said, hey, return to your cell, lock down, don't interfere, don't worry about what's going on, it's none of your business. Those men decided to stand up in that moment and say, hey, listen, we don't have no problem going to our cell, that's no problem. We want to make sure that this man leaves this situation with his life. And actually the intro that I open with in the documentary is I do a comparison with George Floyd, because George Floyd was being murdered in real time in front of people who were literally 10 feet away. And I actually watched the jury trial of all that. And I watched those witnesses get up on that jury stand and tell the court and tell the world that they feel such guilt. And so some of them even experience suicidal thoughts because of the fact that they just stood there and did nothing as they watch a man slowly meet his death, you know? So that is such a, that was so impactful to me. And then I go back to 1985 and look at John Cole and Christopher Trotter and see that they did not allow themselves, even when they knew that they would probably suffer, they could be killed themselves. They knew how these men operated. But still, in the face of that level of danger, they had the courage to say, nah, I gotta do something. I'm gonna do my best to prevent you from murdering somebody right in our face, you know? So the fact that they stood up and done that, it really motivated me, and it really affected me in a very personal way, because I was a lay advocate in prison. I could have very well been in the same situation, you know, and I asked myself, could I really have done that like these brothers did, you know? And I really admire and esteem these brothers for the quick action that they took to save this man's life. And Lincoln Love, after that day, he did leave with his life, and it's probably deemed just because of the actions that John Cole and Christopher Trotter took. So, you know, they saved that man's life because of them interfering, because they had actually received orders, those officers, to kill him, you know? And they had actually received those orders. What you say?
No, and the orders, again, a lot of what we're saying, particularly the white supremacist group, the orders to kill him, this is in a deposition from a guard who worked there, who was there that day and actually was involved in what eventually becomes the uprising, Michael Richardson. So we know that from him. So we know that from the prisoners too, because they were experienced.
They're on the other end of it,
right. Mm-hmm. But for people who want to have the evidence of the state or whatever, like we know that from them. Like we know that they said literally the phrase was Michael Richardson said, he asked, what do you want us to do with Lincoln Love? And the response was to kill the son of a bitch. That's what it says in the deposition.
Word for word.
Word for word.
So
yeah. What you say?
Well, no, I'm just kind of like thinking through just a lot of what I'm hearing from y'all, and I have like multiple responses. I haven't watched the doc yet, and so like I'm visualizing things. And I'm also like, that part about George Floyd has always stuck with me, in terms of like, on one end, like I completely understand feeling that guilt, and like it's always easy to talk a good game like that wouldn't happen in front of me, yada yada yada. But I'm also thinking about, one, the courage that you're talking about with the Pendleton too, because when people are like, you know, systematized, because I worked in a juvenile court. You know, I worked in the juvenile court system, so I worked with mostly young boys, a lot of young girls, and I would visit them in lockup, and you know, you're trying to work within the system to do help for people that need, like directly, they need you. You know, I sometimes get frustrated, especially with online leftist discourse, which you all are luckily don't involve yourselves in, but people talk real big and they tend to poo-poo, like not just especially direct action, but like people that are actually on the front lines doing work with people, that doesn't get, that don't get likes and shares on Instagram, etc.
Right.
But one thing that's really like telling of like how deep the problem goes is that it's just as reasonable that the Pendleton 2 would have acted like the folks with George Floyd. You know what I'm saying? Because the system is set up to freeze you in that moment and to force you to think about the consequences, to think about the fact that you might get 2 centuries worth of time for that. And it tells you that no, we just need, what'd you call it? Line. What was the role that they were in that you were in?
Lay advocates.
Lay advocates. You need lay advocates, and I was a social worker. You just need that, and that will fix the problem. Even as we're like explicitly ignoring the fact that a white supremacist organization has developed in the prison system, in the prison guards. You know what I'm saying? And we know that's happening. We know that's the case for police right now. We know that's happening in the military. Right. Like we have just as much evidence as you're speaking to for these things, and it's just a wild kind of like piece of knowledge to delve into, that we're being told to work within a system that we're also being told to ignore the explicitly harmful and dangerous elements within it, and that somehow those things are going to come together and fix the problem. So
right.
I cut you off though. Go ahead and continue.
Well, just to wrap it up, basically, so then they did interject, and because they interjected, then it did draw all of that violent intent off of Lincoln Love. So they did save his life, but it brought it all upon them. So now,
whole prison. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the whole prison. So now they ran to J Cell House, which is the housing unit where they were located.
Wait, but right before they get in there, though, remember they're getting chased and they had to fight off the guards. And actually, Balagoon gets stuck, and it looks like the guards are chasing. So Naeem, again, this is the Pendleton 2. Naeem takes one of the guards hostage and makes him open the door so Balagoon can slide in, and then they lock themselves in the cell. I just want, like, again, these, like, Naeem had military training, right? So Naeem really knew what he was doing. Like, Naeem wasn't even actually supposed to be in a prison like that. He only had a petty theft, but because he had military training, they put him in a maximum security prison.
And gave him the maximum sentence.
Right. And another
4
thing,
whole years. He got sentenced for 4 years for petty theft. First charge, first felony, first time being arrested ever. How you get maxed out for the first time you ever encounter any type of level of the criminal justice system? So they were attacked and penalized all throughout this whole thing, even before that day of the uprising. It was several different levels of injustice.
They only had, remember, they had for the audience, Naeem only had 3 months left on his sentence, and he still chose to do this. Only 3 months left, so he could have went home. Balagoon only had 3.5 years left, which in prison time is not anything. So 3.5 years, 3 months, and back then you didn't even do your full time. So they'd have gotten out.
This is before the crime bill. Wow.
Yeah. So they'd have gotten out sooner, particularly Balagoon, I believe, and they still chose to do this. Continue, King. I just want to drop them little gems.
Yeah. So then they took over the cell house, kept all the officers outside. There were some officers that were still within J Cell House. What they did to those officers was they gathered them up and locked them in a cell. And then they put other inmates who would follow along with with the lead that they were taking to protect those officers and keep them safe and keep them unharmed. So even in the face of this, even in the midst of these officers trying to do war, trying to execute them, they were still thinking about other people involved. They were still thinking about everybody else around them. In the face of all this turmoil and chaos, They were still pensive, mindful. Okay, we have to protect these guards. We have to keep them safe because this is not what this is about. It's not about us attacking or trying to hurt or inflict pain and violence on these officers. It's about preventing them from killing us, you know? And so then from that point, after they placed them somewhere safe and made sure they were okay, and making sure that all the inmates are there, were following in line and making sure they were okay. Now they're trying to think of a solution to come out of this. The uprising lasted about 15 hours, more or less. And during that time, they had the idea to call, what was the station, WLTC?
The black radio station they called WLTC. And they were like, yo, if y'all don't, this is all in the doc. They're like, this is Minka. He's like, yo, if y'all don't come here now, they gonna kill us. And he's like, he had to pretty much argue with him because they didn't believe me at first. Like, no, seriously, y'all don't come down here, because they needed people from outside the prison to come in. If not, the prisoners can just say anything happened. Again, it's the same thing with the police, where I fear for my life, whatever. So the prison can say anything happens. So they like, we need witnesses. We need people to come in here. You know, so the National Guard eventually got called in. The Indianapolis Star, which is like the main newspaper in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Recorder, which is the main black newspaper in Indianapolis, all sent journalists to this location, you know, as a way of, as negotiators and as witnesses, you know, because like Ken said, they had these demands that they were trying to push. There was actually 14 different demands. Some of that was just basic stuff like more rec time, just better conditions in the prison. Because one of the things that led to some of the turmoil earlier was they weren't getting basic cleaning supplies, and we take some of that for granted. So imagine if you just can't get toilet paper, but you need to use the bathroom. You can't get soap. You know, like this is the type of stuff that people will be protesting because they couldn't even get those things.
And it's still happening now. Like here in Atlanta, we just had a prisoner. I don't know all the details, as you probably heard about it, who died and was eaten by bed bugs and ants. In his cell. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So they called WLTC radio station, black radio station that they would listen to every night. They turned to them for help. They contacted other news outlets like Two Blacks Said. All of those different groups descended upon the jail. So I want to keep everybody's mind in tune with the fact that the whole entire time that there were altercations before they even got to the cell house with the Pendleton 2 and the racist guards. And they had gotten the upper hand. If they wanted to severely hurt somebody, severely injure someone, to kill someone, it would have been done. They had the upper hand. They took it over. That was never their intention. That proves that was never in their hearts. You know what I'm saying? So the whole time, from the very beginning to the very end, the only thing they sought to do was retain life, keep people alive, just trying to get this message heard and understood. So it went on for more or less about 15 hours. And then they go to court. Once they go to court, as you can imagine, injustice after injustice. They had so much proof, so much evidence on their side, but none of that evidence was admissible or allowed to be viewed by the jury. Every time their evidence was presented, the jury was asked to leave the room.
And this was an all-white jury, by the way. So in a county that I think at the time was like 40% black. So it's not that they didn't have access, they as in the state didn't have access to black people. But yeah, it was an all-white jury. I believe there was like one alternative one who might have been black when I look at the records. But that says how bad their case was. If you have an all-white jury members who are related to some of the guards who worked in Pendleton, and they still dismissed them when it was time to talk about the case of the Pendleton 2. The judge still dismissed them, still didn't want them to hear it. You know,
and I don't want to give the whole documentary away. I want everybody. I want to kind of hold it as much as possible. I want to, but I do want to say this. You know, there were officers, there were medical staff, there were different staffs in the prison, in the penitentiary at that time, who all said the same things that the Pendleton Two were saying about what they had endured, what they were going through, what men of color would suffer from at that time in the penitentiary. So this is not, this documentary isn't just one-sided. You know, I want people to know that we did hear from everybody and try to incorporate as much and compile it as much to give a honest testimony as much as we could, so that the viewer could see exactly what these men had faced and the level of courage that they displayed going into this with both eyes open. And I also want to say that I think it's very important for us as a community. I don't care if you're in Atlanta, I don't care if you're in New York, I don't care if you're in Indiana. Us as a community, it is of the utmost importance at this time that we come together, form our organizations, form our groups that fight, because we are the ones suffering. And when I say fight, I mean to have a political presence to stand against the oppression that is not backing up in any way. It is only proceeding harder, and it's only going forward, and it is only growing. Now they're killing people in the middle of the street on camera and daring you to say anything about it. This will only continue if we do not come together and form our own unions with one another. Then the suffering that our children and their children, our grandchildren, are going to receive is going to be mind-boggling for us. We can't leave our future generations in that type of position. And that's why this Pendleton 2 is of the utmost importance for people to view it.
Yeah, and I would also say definitely everything he just said, and I would just say on a basic human level, I think watching it, you get to hear them tell it, and that's, I think, was very unique about this film. Is it's, yeah, we did our research and everything, but you primarily going to hear the voices of people behind bars. Like we recorded this shit on the phone, like talking to them while they're in prison. Like we ain't have no special camera access, anything, right? We recorded them while they're in prison, telling us what happened, 30 plus years ago.
Right.
40
this is
plus
guerrilla
years
style, I think you said. Which is
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like, as much as I like, it's a running theme on my channel. We talk about how the algorithm is racist, but I always hold love for YouTube because it gives opportunity. If you push the envelope and you make connections, like, it gives opportunity for stories like this to reach an audience that it just cannot get in the previous centralized media formations that we had. So that's dope.